Welcome, everybody, to another week of Wealth Wisdom, where we're helping you build wealth and legacy.
Companies are like an organism trying to survive.
It's always a risk when you're investing in a company that's purely tied to someone's brand.
45% of Americans have gone into debt for a Disney trip. All right, welcome back to another episode of Wealth Wisdom by Fox Hill Wealth Management. Today, we're diving into something that's always fueled the American economy, entrepreneurship. We're talking about turning your dream into reality by launching your new business. So whether you've already started one, you're about to start one, or you're looking to optimize your financial strategies, this show is going to be for you. We're going to take a deep dive into really everything, what it takes to be a successful entrepreneur, from setup to exit. But first, let's dive into this week's rapid fire financial news. And at the end of the episode, we are going to dive into one of our current holdings. So stay tuned for that as well. Guys, there's not many surprises this week for such like a consequential couple weeks. You know, starting with PCI is at 2.5%. The Fed did not cut rates this week. It was a very, very unsurprising event. The market said, hey, they're not going to cut. But I think there's a lot of reasons to cut. What do you guys think? Any thoughts right there? I mean, you've got jobs are still good. Inflation's good. Bill, what are you thinking? What do you think? Were you surprised? Do you think they should cut?
I just think they're not going to until we get, I feel like the Fed is always a little behind, right, on things. And I just feel like until we get a bad jobs report or inflation is down at that 2% level or below, I just don't think they're going to do anything. There's in his mind, there's no reason to do anything. So
you think 2%'s the number they're going after now?
Yeah, that's what they've been saying the entire time.
Okay.
That's what their goal is. They want inflation to be at 2%. So if it's still a little bit above that, and the stock market is not tanking by any means or anything like that.
Yep.
And jobs reports are coming in good, and they're not going to cut. So I know it's still kind of priced in to maybe have a couple before the end of the year, but I just don't think they're in a rush to do it. I don't think he's obviously not going to be pushed around. So he's going to continue that path.
Yeah, you've got Trump calling him a big dummy. Eric, pretty entertaining. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, they've been pretty consistent with what they've been saying, right? They're concerned about tariffs, whatever they do end up being. Higher import costs, everything's more expensive for businesses to produce. That then gets passed on to the consumer. So if all the iPhones made in China are now 20% more, it's passed on to the consumer, it becomes inflationary. So they're still looking ahead. They don't want to come in too early, lowering rates if there is going to be inflation from tariffs. They're just being very cautious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think he's doing anything differently than his predecessors either. So none of them, the past 2 or 3 Fed chairs have lowered rates either in the last year. But
yeah, some may call him overly cautious. Some may call him a dummy.
Yeah. Well,
it
is. I think there's real data. It is costing the United States a fortune right now with the floating all the debt payments. It's something incredible. I mean, I don't even know the data. It's like 80 million a day.
Problem, right? Am I right?
Yeah, and I think that's where Trump's coming from, saying like, "What's going on? Just lower rates now." But like you guys said, I guess you can't blame them. Do you think we'll have rate cuts later this year, or you think we'll go all year without one?
I mean, didn't they project 2 rate cuts? The Fed themselves. Yeah, I think that's maybe correct. We're following behind Europe, right? Europe's like a whole percent lower.
Yeah,
lower than
Europe's
us.
had 10 rate cuts this year.
Yeah.
Yep, the Fed typically does what it says. You know what I mean? There's not too often do they say they're going to do something and nothing materializes. So, they're projecting that. I think it's going to happen. I just said, just like I said before, I think they're just waiting to maybe get a little better news on the inflation point, and then if there's some type of job, excuse me, Gallon is cold here. If on the jobs reports. If the jobs reports start, weakening, then I think, we'll see it sooner rather than later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool. So the other big piece of news we've got, they're calling it a chip shortage on steroids. The rare earth metal shortage throughout the world, basically because China has imposed a lot of restrictions, trade restrictions on all of these 17 metallic elements that are found. They're critical for everyday products. So from cars, jet engines, smartphones, flat screen TVs, they're crucial. Some manufacturers, car manufacturers throughout the United States and in Europe have said, hey, we might have to completely shut down the factory. Fortunately, so the latest update on this one, did you guys know about this? This is wild. It basically turned out to, in like the U.S. trade, standoff, a tariff standoff, you've got, I think it was one of China's best chips to play. In their hand, they had it, and I think now, last week, so this is a little dated, but President Trump announced that we're going to get the rare earths to the U.S. from China.
Yeah, because Justin, you were saying that they supply close to 70% of the earth's rare elements at the current moment, right?
Exactly.
But the U.S. could probably produce it. I just know that there's a lot of restrictions and things like that, so it makes it much harder to mine it here. Where in China, it's kind of a free for all in a sense, or they're very, they kind of get it pushed through.
Yep.
No restrictions, no, no issues.
Exactly. It's actually an interesting thing. I mean, like 50 some odd years ago, the U.S. was basically the world monopoly on this, and we exported a ton of rare earths. And then regulations, were imposed here, and companies just said, screw it, we're not going to produce these anymore. And so China has basically taken that over.
Was it an environmentalist thing or just a cost thing, like where the U.S. was moving on from a manufacturing economy to a service economy? Or was it,
yeah, it's a good question.
Environmentalism getting in the way?
I'm sure it definitely had came from an environmental angle. There was just the data I found, it was, in preparation for the show, is really just a lot more regulations that were imposed on these companies. Right. So I'm assuming just because of, the past history, that's where it came from. And China has said, that's fine. We'll just keep going with it.
It seems to be a big part of this administration that, a big theme is to not be reliant on other countries for anything.
Yeah,
it would make sense that they're going to ramp up. They're going to try to ramp up production in the U.S., but I would assume that would take a long time to build out the facilities to process rare earth minerals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Just looking. Sorry.
No,
we produce 12.3%. So China is obviously the stronghold at that 70%. U.S. produces right now 12.3% of the world's rare earth elements. So you would think, just judging by the land mass, right, of the United States and things like that, that we could ramp that up and start being more of a producer if some of those restrictions and things like that were alleviated.
Yep. And I think the latest on the tariff rates is 55% on China, 10% to us. So that's interesting. It definitely allowed them to come to the table and talk more, which is preventing shutdown. But I mean, it could have been. I mean, think about that. How much these, and they're called rare earth minerals. They're really not that rare. They just need to be mined and refined. So it is very interesting.
Yeah, you'd figure based on how this stuff is in everything we value as a society, that they're gonna ramp it up, and maybe it'll follow the same path that petroleum followed in the U.S., where we produce so much of it, we're net exporters. Yeah. I could see that easily becoming a thing.
Yeah, I would imagine too, with that type of stranglehold on the market, I mean, that must be a huge part of their economy, so if they're producing that much of it worldwide and net exporting it to that many nations and things like that, I would imagine that they really can't slow down too much because that would really affect their economy overall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And so let's. I think that's everything in news. I mean, again, not a terribly surprising week, but we'll keep you guys updated as well as things got further along. So let's dive into the main topic. I don't know, Bill, if you knew this, but the numbers in for entrepreneurship, and we have to like kind of calibrate this. The small what is called a small business, and we'll get into that later. But the numbers are staggering, right? So there's currently 33.2 million small businesses operating in the United States. That's 99.9% of all businesses in America. Which that blew my mind.
Wow.
Like I just didn't know that. And then together, these small businesses generate over 40% of the entire nation's GDP, contributing to $6 trillion to our economy annually. But so I was like, how can that be, right? So like the SBA defines a small business as fewer than 500 employees and less than 7.5 million in annual receipts. Which do you think that's a small business, Bill?
What are you talking about? Like, so would you say? What
So
are you
like
talking about?
this is the definition of small business. 'Cause I
Revenue
think
receipts.
both revenue and less than 500 employees. I think that's a big business, but everything's relative. You do you work
What's
with
your
tons of
cutoff
businesses.
number? What's your cutoff number? Is it like 10 employees? Is it what like
So
in
the
your
SBA,
head?
that's what I'm saying. My number, for
I'm
employees.
saying, like, what do you say as opposed to what the SBA says? I'm just saying
I
from
think of
like,
like 10 people, 20 people, right?
I think,
Like,
I guess there's like a micro business, right? I always said small business, right? I started a small business. We had like 100 employees, but it was, they were part-time, and then you had, probably like 10
contractors and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. You have a lot of people in the wings, and you have probably 6 to 10 main people. But
Yeah, but I mean,
I
would
think that's
say
a
this.
micro business.
If you have less than 500 people, like there's a good chance if you're the owner, as long as you're involved, you probably know every single person, right, in the business.
At 500, you think?
Just about, yeah.
Wow.
Maybe, you know what I mean? I think if you're a good
Yeah.
hands-on owner, you probably
Okay.
would.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In some respect. So, or it's small enough where you could. How about that? You might not.
Right. So you don't think I was shocked. So you're not shocked at all. So it's fewer. It's the SBA definition of independent business, small business has to be independently owned. That has to be a must.
Mm-hmm.
Fewer than 500 employees, and less than 7.5 million in annual receipts.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you have 500 employees, I would hope that you're making more than 7.5 million, right? Like that's, unless you have great margins, that's going to be tough to employ all those people.
yeah, you're operating a sweatshop probably.
No, impossible. So yeah, but less than 7.5. So I think it has to be one of the two. How that works, right? Those numbers didn't make sense to me. The 500 employees as a small business.
Oh, it's not one and the other?
Well, I think it has to be one or the other. I don't think the two can coexist, right?
Yeah.
Like
Like
what you just said.
Conceptually, yeah.
But still, I mean, so 33.2 million small businesses today at 99 and fueling, that's 99.9% of all businesses in America. So I thought that was amazing. And things are booming. So just in 2023, there were 5.5 million business applications filed.
Yeah, I believe it. I mean, if you think about how fast it is to scale up a business these days,
Yeah.
don't necessarily need office space, don't necessarily need, you know what I mean? You need an internet connection.
Yeah, every tool is a subscription model, so it's cheap to get the
Yeah, you
software
get in and
like
out,
upfront.
right?
Yeah.
Do you think there's, and I don't know this, I'm looking for your opinion. Do you think most of these new businesses were like side hustles? I'm just curious. This because it happened a lot. It was like a post-COVID surge, 37% increase compared to pre-pandemic levels.
I would say no, just because we know that the rates, it's 20% of small businesses fail in the first year. So I would assume that Would a side hustle fail at a greater rate than that? Probably. So to just assume no. But,
Yeah.
hey, I could be wrong.
Yeah. Bill, what do you think? Thoughts on the side hustle concept?
No, I mean, I just think that like a lot of people, right, there's so many different services and things like that, right, within, you know what I mean, the United States to kind of help supplement other businesses. And I just think that, you can be doing something for a company and then you can look at it and say, geez, I'm doing so much of this work on my own. Do I really need to be giving this company like part of my revenue? And are they doing anything to help me, or are they paying me enough for the services they're providing me? So I know, Eric, you and I started a company a couple of years ago where we said, all right, the owners aren't doing anything for us anymore, right? They're really providing very little support of any kind. They're not really around. Why don't we, and we're doing this basically on our own. Why don't we just go ahead and start this on our own? We can get this scaled up, and up and running very quickly. And kind of cut out someone who's really, again, not doing anything, and just taking a very large cut, right, of the revenue flows. So I feel like a lot of people are doing that.
It is 44% are side hustles though, Justin.
Really?
According
Okay.
to a Bloomberg article, I just searched it. From 2023, 44% of new small businesses were side hustles.
That's interesting.
Ours is not. Ours is not a side hustle.
Yeah, you guys started Fox Hill Wealth 2 years ago, and you dove head first. There was never a thought of a side hustle. It was just, we're doing this 100% clean slate. It's a
you don't have an option in this
Side
business.
hustles.
Yeah.
There is no option in this business. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's not.
Was it scary?
You can't be. Was it scary?
Yeah.
No.
And how did you guys? Yeah. Okay.
No,
not scary.
Well, we already
Nerve
had a
wracking?
lot
Not
of-
maybe nerve wracking. Was it nerve wracking? Like, how did you guys push through that?
So I already had like 8 years of experience in the industry. Bill, I don't know, like 15 to 20 years experience in the industry already. We already had a ton of connections. We had already been in boutique businesses our whole life. So you're not coming from a big box store where you're just doing one thing. So it was nice. We had the training prior to moving on. A lot of people, like when they go to start a small business, it's this big dream, but they've never actually acquired the necessary skills like throughout their career. So they don't. It's one of those things where they don't know totally how hard it's going to be, or they don't have the connections to continue through.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that jives with the stat. The average age of an entrepreneur today is 44 years old.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I mean, it also, like, some of those guys have probably had enough time to build up capital, which you need money to start a business.
Capital, also like learning, other people. They got a good network, right? At that point, you're 40 years old. You've had 20 years experience, so I think that's a big deal, right? Having that, just people. Hey, you got questions? You know where to go quickly. You know what I mean? It's not like it's not something that you can just get into and then say, geez, I hope I can find somebody who does this. No, you need to have those people available very fast, because if you don't have problem solvers within your network, everything it's just going to take longer. If it's take longer, income is not coming in. As a small business, you need to make sure that you're having cash flow, because as we saw, they can fail quickly too, right? So they can start up very quickly, but they can fail very quickly too, because if you don't have cash flow and you don't have problem solvers and people who might think outside the box a little bit, you can get in a world of hurt very quickly.
Mm-hmm. So you guys are advocating. I just to clarify for people listening, would you advocate more for someone who's, say, right out of college or even high school today? I don't even care. But and they're like, hey, they come to you guys, they're like, I'm going to start a company right now. Would you encourage them to put that off and instead go get real world experience working for a big company and build all these network, everything you're saying. Instead,
it is nice because they can learn the systems and things like that, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really nice aspect of learning the systems and just how all that stuff integrates from top down, right? That's a really good thing about getting some experience and seeing how major companies run, right? So once you see that,
it's huge. Yeah,
it just gives you like a little better outlook, because even if you're a great entrepreneur, you have good intellect in that area, great problem solving skills, and you can provide something that's really nice. You still don't know what you don't know, and just seeing some of that stuff in real time at a company that's had to put out some of those fires and do all those little things, that can be very beneficial down the line. It's not totally critical, but I do think a lot of entrepreneurs who maybe did go that route, where they just got right into business right away, if they look back, they'd say, geez, I do wish I knew a little bit more, right? Or had a little more experience in these areas. It would have been a little more helpful, right? You know what I mean? Than just kind of winging it,
Yeah.
But neither way is wrong. I feel like you go through a little more pain, right, in that startup phase, if you don't have that experience. But
yeah, true. Oh, there's a lot more. It's a huge learning curve. I would say much bigger, much steeper learning curve.
Yeah. The other thing too is, like, you get a nice corporate job. They're paying your health care. You got that 401k match, great benefits. You meet a bunch of people at work. You're going to the bars after work.
That's all true. Yeah.
They have a career path set up for you already. It's a giant company. They already have that stuff set in place. If you do your job, it's just so much less risky. And the entrepreneur path, the small business path, does require like a certain personality type. And if you don't have that, I would say just stick with the corporate path. Like, you will be incredibly successful, and it's a lot safer.
Yep. And those are all great points. Absolutely. I often think about that. So I started a company right out of college, like a year out of college. And it was incredibly hard. And it was just like, we jumped in. The only benefit I think I had at that point was the cost of living for me at 21, 22 versus today with the family. Completely different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's the one thing is, like,
I think that's the one major
risk. You could be doing the same exact thing, but depending on what point in your life it is, the risk is entirely different. You know what I mean? When you're young, just coming out, the one nice thing is, you're going to be able to feed yourself a little bit. You know what I mean? Things like that. Hopefully you're relatively healthy. Insurance isn't that big a deal, right? You can get something through.
I got insurance through the state.
Yeah, you get through the Mass Connector. You get kind of a, a cheaper policy. All those things are a lot less, right? So, and you don't have to worry about it. It's like, oh, all I need to do is have this, just enough to have rent, just enough to, things like that. If you got a family, there's a lot of stuff that comes up, right? So, you have a bad month or something like that. Yeah. It's a lot different, you know what I mean, when it's just you relying on it versus other people.
Yep.
Right. That's
I think I lived on like $600 a month, at 22 to make it work. Try doing that today.
Yeah, which is crazy. I mean, now you couldn't. Yeah, right. I mean, just with the exponential, cost of everything.
I'm serious. We paid ourselves $500 every 2 weeks. That's what I paid myself for the first 2 years.
Do you ever wish you had gone the corporate route, Justin? Or would that opportunity?
Yeah, what I did was, I think what we did was incredibly risky. It was not. I can look back and say, if I went into a corporate job, it would have been a whole lot safer. There's no doubt.
And how successful do you think you would have been at?
I don't know. I don't know how to
stayed in that that network and climbed your way up there. Maybe you're
I have no idea. It's
hard.
It's hard to quantify. It's hard to quantify all of that. I think it was just a path. I did it, and at the time I said, "Listen, the worst case scenario, I go get a job." I'm 24 now versus 22. I met my
When
wife
when
to the
you're younger,
business.
you can fail, and there's not like a ton of consequences. You can just move on. But it's knowing
Totally.
when you failed, right? Don't just keep going if it ain't working.
Now, Justin, what was your rent back then for like living? I'm just interested on the $600
Like, I
a
was
month.
going on the credit card.
No. I live with 4 other guys in Cleveland Circle, and my share of the rent was $500.
So you were living off $100 a month?
Basically,
The
Nice.
numbers
Ramen.
just don't really add up.
Maybe it was 200, Bill. Maybe it was 200, but I swear to God, at that point in time, you can ask April, even when I met her, I was eating pasta. Like Trader Joe's. I went to Trader Joe's, super
99
affordable.
cents a pound.
Great
right?
spot. I ate. My diet consisted of bread, like a piece of toast in the morning, some hummus and pita bread for lunch, and then pasta for dinner. That's it. Swear to God. And we would host tons of events in the city. We'd host, thousands of events. And so we would host at bars. And I would tell the bar owner, like, listen, I'm bringing, I need free apps.
Bring
You got to
these
put
people,
free.
and I need a dinner out of this.
Essentially, I said, listen, I'm going to
With a
bring,
doggy bag. I need
30,
a doggy
30,
bag.
50, 100 people. Can you provide some free apps to entice them? They're all going to be drinking. They're like, great, no problem. I was scarfing down those free
Can I
apps.
get a cheeseburger, please?
Dude, I'm serious. The first 2 years, that's what it took. It was
thing you're not
constantly
stealing that,
reinvesting.
Yeah.
We could have paid ourselves more, but we chose to reinvest everything into the business. That definitely helped. And think about, even if today, if you started a business today, and we should get into like the do's and don'ts of business right now, but I think if you brought on investors who demanded, to be paid dividends, like profits, I mean, no investor does that because they know it's going to slow down the growth of the business. So if you're bringing on VC or angels, or you take a loan, SBA loan, which is a great option, I think. They're not asking for profits. You want to reinvest as much possible so you can get a bigger return at the end. But let's dive into that. Like, what do's and don'ts? What are the mistakes you guys see people making when they start a business? What should they be looking out for? I guess let's start just like proper setup. Bill, you help a lot of people with taxes, mistakes, right?
Yeah, no, I think understanding the entity structures and things like that, and where you can be benefiting from it. I hear a lot of people say like, "Oh, I started an LLC for tax purposes," when all they had was a sole proprietorship, right, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, okay, well, you didn't do it for tax purposes because there's actually no difference between a single member LLC and a sole proprietorship, right? It's taxed the exact same way. So I try explain that to people right off the bat, like, you want to do it for risk management, right? You know what I mean? Because you want to have that separate entity so that you are, not subjecting your own assets and things like that to liability, right? If something happens to the business, you want them to have to sue the LLC and only go after the assets that are within the LLC. But that's the advantage of it. There's not a tax.
There's no tax benefit.
Advantage there, right?
What about an S-Corp?
S-Corp does have its own advantages. You can potentially get some tax savings there. I will say, though, that the costs of running an S-Corp do increase, right? So you're going to be paying, I don't know, $2,000 to $5,000 more in costs. But then hopefully, right, you're going to recoup those costs and save yourself some. So, like, once you get around to that $50,000 to $100,000 mark in gross profits overall, or what I would like to say is like what's coming to you, right, for expenditures, an S corporation can be really powerful. Can save you another like $8,000 to like $15,000 if done properly, and that $8,000 to $15,000 can be used for, some of it can be for reinvestment. Some of it can be for your retirement to make sure that you're keeping, putting at least a portion of that on track. So those types, those types of things where it can be beneficial. But you need to make sure you understand the entity that you're picking, why you're doing it, what your long-term outlook is, and that way you can make sure that you pick the right entity so that going forward, you're set up in a good position.
Yep.
What have you guys done for the business structures for each of your businesses? Like, Justin, what did you have with SBA?
SBS. We had a
SBS,
multi-member
sorry.
LLC. There's a LLC,
LLC,
throughout.
yeah.
I in hindsight, I think, I wish someone said, hey, like, you might want to consider an S-Corp at some point. I think there was a turning point. We missed that. Yeah,
Yep.
we missed that boat. But
You can always switch too. There is ways, you know what I mean? If you
right.
start out one way, there is ways to change the entity. Actually, pretty simply, right? Just to reform with the IRS and then maybe just filing with your state.
Right.
So it is something that just because you got in on one way, you don't have to change it down the, you know what I mean? Or you don't have the ability not to
You're not stuck. Yeah.
Yeah. So that is something you can do.
And I think that's crucial to have I think that if I'm starting a company today, I think you have to have like proper setup, but like build the team for yourself. All right. So like have a tax professional, have a lawyer to make sure that things are properly set up, especially if you have partners. You should have the partnership like divorce agreement set up before you start working together, not later. Very important. And I think then like make sure everything's separate. I would say, right? You can't be. They call it piercing the corporate veil. I think, Bill, that's what you were talking about.
No commingling, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't want to commingle your personal assets with the business assets because that, like you say, something happens, you get sued.
Yeah.
And every lawyer will say, "Oh, why is that? You know what I mean? You're not even running this like a business. You're running this like a piggy bank, right? So, therefore, business assets are your assets. Therefore, we're going after your assets, right? So,
yeah. So I think there's like the first 30 days of, I would say 30. You can call it maybe 30 to 60. You can argue that, but I think the bank account. You can't even get a bank account. First, you have to file with the state. Pick your state and file an LLC. Even before that, if you have partners, you got to create an operating agreement and all that. And this is assuming you already have a business plan, right, guys?
Yep.
Then you got your own bank account.
Yep,
what else?
Your tax ID.
Yep.
Your tax ID with the IRS. Then you get, like you said, get your own bank account, get the credit card set up. Yeah, those things, and depending on what it is, right, what your entity, you may have to initiate getting payroll. That's all. That's another thing too that I would say is a very. You want to make sure that you get your payroll set up properly. You want to make sure that you're registered with your state unemployment. You want to make sure that you're registered with your state withholding. There's all these things that you really want to make sure that you do right the first time. It can lead to major problems. A lot of huge payroll companies in this country, they just want to get you started up and going. They don't necessarily they say that they want you to be compliant, but they don't do everything for you. You have to make sure that you get that stuff set up and set up properly, because it leads to major headaches down the line if you're not paying your payroll taxes correctly, things along those lines. There are huge penalties, huge burdens, and things like that to not have it done.
Yeah.
So
That's such a good point.
It's very important to make sure that you get that done and get with someone who maybe is not working for the payroll company to make sure that they can kind of consult on that manner as well. I've just seen so many headaches for some of my small business owners.
Yep.
Where a payroll company like just completely screwed something up. It has led to like huge issues for them because it wasn't done properly, and kind of the headache of trying to unravel some of that stuff. It just can be massively time consuming and just a huge pain, So.
Yeah, I think that goes back to,
I should say.
Yeah. Like building the right team around you, making sure you got people who are experienced and know what they're doing, so they can kind of guide you through these potentially literally $1 million mistakes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really good CPA, really good CPA or tax accountant. really good lawyer, like you said, you know what I mean, to get those documents, set up. Make sure your CPA too really understands entity selection and things along those lines, or your accountant. A lot of times I don't know, I feel like there's a lot of accountants who, they'll just sit there and take orders. They don't really have that proactive mindset, for people. So make sure you're getting not an order taker for an accountant as well. Someone who really knows how to set up and get you grow. That's probably one of the most important things to get started. And then making sure that you have a good financial advisor to, making sure you're on track. Because a lot of times people say, oh, I just want to keep putting back in the business, keep putting back in the business. But you miss out on those crucial compounding years by not getting at least something put away. So you want
I think that's important.
To grow.
Yep.
While also keeping in mind these other things, because you don't want to look up 15 years later. Not every small business is designed to get to a point where you sell off.
Exactly.
It may be, you're doing it. It's giving you cash flow. It's allowing you to live life. But at the same time, you may not have a big pot of gold, right? At the end of this thing, you try to sell it, you might get a year, 2 years revenue or something like that. That's not necessarily going to be, your retirement, right? So you need to keep in mind all these things and make sure that someone is, helping you stay disciplined, in those areas.
100%. I think
having a good banker, having a good, accountant. Make sure that accountant can work with bankers really well. Having a good lawyer, business attorney, having a good financial advisor. Those things are, I would say, are very crucial when starting up a business.
Yeah.
Maybe even more important than that is who you partner with, right? You can have all this stuff set in place. You can have ironclad agreements to begin with, but if you're not working with someone trustworthy, you could certainly get screwed over. So
100%, right?
And once that money's gone, it's gone. So trustworthy person. That's
or if they're just not doing anything or pulling their weight, it just, what I mean, it leads to frustrations. And so that's really important as well.
No, for sure. So I think, just to sum it up for folks, the deadly, I call it the deadly dozen. Eric, what are some of the financial common mistakes you see business owners making?
There's a dozen. Mixing what you guys were talking about, the mixing of personal and business assets, not tracking cash flows on the regular. We have QuickBooks for doing that, or checking your bank accounts regularly.
Yeah.
Underestimating tax obligations at the end of the year. No emergency fund for the business.
That's
what if you have some poor quarters there? Pricing products and services too low. A lot of small business owners, could be an imposter syndrome thing, or not truly calculating what the cost of each item is. Like, what's the amount of service that's going into it? Or you're trying to gain more market share at the cost of your business, but you're too aggressive. You see some restaurants do that with promotions, and then they lose a ton of money and go out of business. Not planning for growth capital needs, ignoring retirement savings. You're kind of banking on the business growing, and that's your retirement, right? Poor credit management. It's incredibly important to have good credit, because it allows you to take out that business loan and grow your business. No business insurance. For us, insurance is really important. We have a $2 million insurance policy in case we have any trading errors that we need to correct. Reinvesting.
It's even more than that now, but hey, just one thing with the poor credit management too. Yeah, a lot of times people, I maxed out credit cards and all those things, and you hear these stories where these success stories where people are like, I was maxed out on my credit cards. For every one of those you hear, there's 50 of people who are paying those things off for 10 years in their business. You know what I mean? So it's good to take risk and things like that. And sometimes you do have to kind of put all your cards to the table, but managing your cash flow, your credit, you know what I mean? Things like that is so crucial. And don't always, just because you heard about one person, you know what I mean, like maxing out all their credit lines and things like that, and they finally made it, take calculated risks. Most people that does not work out for. I would say the majority of people that does not work out for. So be very careful about doing that. Make sure you're staying within your cash flows.
Yep. Cash flow is king. As a small business, you don't have the luxury.
Story at the bars, though, right? I don't know.
No, those are great. But I think you're right. If you can't manage your cash flow, you don't have the luxury to be a Facebook where you have, huge years and years of unprofitable runway. You're starting a business, you survive on the profits and the cash flow. So you got to manage it well. Yeah, these are great. I think, as we wrap up the episode, what should people do? Before you said 44% are side hustles that they're starting these businesses. Yeah. So if they have a day job, should they just go? Most people, should they just draw a clean slate and say, I'm quitting day one? If they have the luxury, should they, maybe they stay, and start a small business and get it up cranking? But what do you guys think? Should people, I can argue both sides very easily. So what should they do before they quit their job? And when should they do that?
I think you should really keep your job as long as you possibly can before jumping into it. You don't want to get to the point where you're killing yourself working 2 jobs or anything like that. But I would make sure that you have sustainable cash flows or know that the business is there.
Yeah.
Right. So as soon as you stop and get into it, you know that the business is there, but do not guess that it's going to be there. Because I just think that can be, everybody thinks they're just going to get in, stuff is going to go really, really well. It's not always the case. There's going to be some struggles. So if you can get to the point where, you're having those sustainable cash flows and things like that, or predictable cash flows, I should say, I think that sets you up for success a lot more.
Absolutely. Make sure the idea is there. It's actually, maybe they call it an MVP, like minimum viable product. I would say, don't get fancy and hung up on perfect. Get something out there. Start testing it while you're at your main company. On nights and weekends, on your own time. Don't use the company time to do it at all, but nights and weekends.
And maybe you quiet quit. You milk.
No way.
Come on.
You can't do that. You cannot, and you can't use their property.
I was going to say, the problem with quiet quitting too is that you ruin previous relationships, right? So if you do that, people are going to say this person was Yep.
You don't want to burn bridges.
Keeping some of those things that can be important for a lot of people.
And legally too, the company has I think grounds to come after part of your business to say, hey, listen, you used our equipment, our time.
On our time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
You use our computers, you use our email. Yeah. So, I wouldn't do that, but I think you're right. I would stay at your company until your side hustle, replaces 60-70% of your income.
Yeah. That's also if you have, it's a family discussion. If you got a partner and kids and stuff.
Definitely. But yeah, and then I think that's it. Anything else? Last words of advice here for everyone listening who's about to start a business today.
I don't know. Don't do it. Just keep your corporate job. You'll live an amazing life that's way less stressful.
No. Do it. You're probably going to be ready before you even, before you make the plunge, right? And I always say most people, right, kind of jump in almost too late. Or not too late. I shouldn't say that. Most people don't start. They're already ready. They don't realize it, right? Mm-hmm. So jump in. Once you have all those things, just make sure that you get, set up from the start.
Yeah. Yeah, there's today, according to the statistics, there's going to be 15,000 people who start a new company today.
Wow. Maybe they're inspired by us.
Today there'll be 20,000. I don't know. If they listen to you, then no one's going to start. The stat jump falls down to 5,000.
Bill,
the American dream is alive and well, right? So
yeah.
no, I would say don't listen to Eric. And also, Eric's saying this. Meanwhile, when we were talking about starting a business, all he's saying is how I've always wanted to have my own company. I've always wanted, you know what I mean, things like that. Maybe didn't realize some of the difficulties that come with it. But so what's the old do as I say, not as I do?
Yeah.
Eric's case, it's actually the opposite. But no, it can be very rewarding. It's harder. Don't get me wrong. It's not. It would be nice to work at a company and say you work your 40, 50 hours a week. But at the end of the day, you turn off and everything, you know what I mean? Like, there's no bothers. That doesn't happen with a small business, right? You know what I mean? There's fires constantly. There's stuff that comes up constantly. So, that's the tough part, but there's a lot of great things about it, too.
I think it's incredibly rewarding. And it's probably one of the best ways to learn, right? There's nothing will make you learn more than running your own company. Then you'll grow in all different ways. Right. in your person, in the topics that you have to learn. I mean, there's so many countless times where I've like, oh shit, I've never experienced this, and I digest a book on that topic, and when you have to ingest a book into your just slam it into your brain because you have to solve a problem immediately, you will retain that information for life. But anyway, I think overall the data is clear. Americans are starting businesses at record levels, and they're driving job creation, economic growth, and American innovation. So I think if you've been thinking about starting your own company, you're in good company. The key is just preparing financially and making sure you guys are set up and understanding the risks, having a solid plan, jumping in before you do it. But again, there's 33.2 million small businesses, and they didn't happen by accident. So they happen because people like you who are listening decided to turn their dreams into reality. And that's the show. Next episode, we're going to dive into a topic that's near and dear to our hearts. And that is why we believe in 100% equities. Let's see.
Wow,
stay tuned. See you
inspired.
guys.
All right. Be good, everybody.